career courses as well as CGSC. Again, the course revision, rebalancing them from what had fundamentally become focused in time of war appropriately on preparing soldiers to go down range and be successful, back to a more broad set of competencies consistent with the larger profession. We also see it in the way we train today. And again, we have to understand that for the last 10 years, we've been appropriately focused on readiness. But when you think about becoming an Army of preparation, when you think about units that are no longer on the patch chart, there are significant opportunities to exercise leader development in the training process. And that's how we did it for years. And so how have we changed the way we train to optimize the principles of the Army profession? And you can see a very close fit in terms of those concepts as they tie together. The operational force, again, I think comes in largely in terms of how things operate in a unit on a day-to-day basis, how they are adapting doctrine, how they are adapting the new training procedures that take place. We are assisting. We have a program that called MAPITS where we train mobile training teams to go out to units. There's been a huge surge of requests for training teams to send sort of essentially a train-the-trainer type approach to bring these concepts into a unit and how they operate. It will take time, and I will say, as I say, it'll work its way through the institutional force. It's working its way through the operational force. Frankly, if you see a unit that's not on the patch chart, we sort of crosswalk that to units that are requesting these mobile training teams to implement this doctrine, and it will take time for the units that are downrange. But fundamentally, I think we're well on our way. A lot of work to do. We will continue to study, continue to do surveys, but I think we're headed in the right direction on implementation. Thank you.
Sir, thank you. General Huntoon.
I've been asked to talk about how you take the Army profession and bring it to life at the pre-commissioning level. And I'm going to talk specifically about what we do at the United States Military Academy, but I would like to say at the very outset that what we do at West Point in large measure is very similar to what takes place at Cadet Command in all their various ROTC detachments as they too develop their cadets, as they prepare them for the responsibilities of officership, which is so fundamental in our profession. So integrating, embedding, re-emphasizing all these elements of the Army profession is a daily, continuous, sequential, and progressive leader development process at the United States Military Academy. The elements of the profession that are defined for you by the United States Army that speak to trustworthiness, to military expertise, to esprit de corps, honorable service, and to the stewardship of the profession. These are addressed in some manner every single day in the 47 months of a cadet's experience at the United States Military Academy. We prepare our cadets for a career of service through character development, through officership instruction, and always underwritten, as the profession of arms is underwritten, by a focus on ethics, by a code of honor. And the means to this end, of course, is leader development by our officers at the Military Academy, our non-commissioned officers, and also certainly by our soldiers and civilians at West Point. Linkages to the traits of the Army profession, those 5 traits we just spoke about, begin on the very first day at the United States Military Academy. Our cadets on reception day come to us from every state in the Union and from 33 countries around the world for each of those 4 years. They gather in Eisenhower Hall, they say farewell to their families, they begin the assimilation process on that very first day, and what I describe as the 37th minute for each one of those cadets, they move to Thayer Hall and they gather in classrooms for their administrative in-processing, and at one classroom on that 37th minute, they pick up this card. And this card is the simple statement of the Code of Honor of the United States Military Academy. This is the beginning of their commitment to the Army profession, to its ethical underpinning. It's not for that day or for the 4 years at West Point. It is for a lifetime of service as an officer, as a citizen of the nation. The West Point mission is our start point for everything that we do in leader development, and it speaks about the education, the training, and the inspiration of the Corps cadets so that each graduate is a commissioned leader of character, a leader of character, committed to the values of duty, honor, and country, and prepared for a career of professional excellence and service to the nation as an officer in the United States Army. Now, what brings this to life, the corollary to our mission, is what we describe as the West Point Leader Development System. This is the mechanism, the forcing function, the means by which the entire community is committed to character development of the United States Corps of Cadets. It's integrated across all 3 domains of the United States Military Academy: the military domain, the academic domain, and certainly the physical programs. And it guides the development of our cadets into those commissioned leaders of character that the United States Army must have. It also speaks to the accountability of the military and civilian staff and community members at West Point. Now, the competence and character requirements of our officers have never been greater than they are today. And all of you in this room understand that very, very well. This is the era of volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous operating environments. It's a fundamental landscape that requires that all our graduates, graduates of the United States military, graduates of ROTC, must meet, that they must come to those difficult days with a strong foundation of values-based leadership skills. And everyone at the United States Military Academy has a burden of responsibility to develop the character of the United States Corps of Cadets. Our system is aligned with the Army's leader development system, and it builds the capacity to lead in this era of complexity, of change, and of competitiveness. So we have 10 outcomes that we're looking for our graduates. Let me enumerate those. Lead and inspire their units to accomplish the mission. Embrace their roles as United States Army officers. Demonstrate a broad perspective that is open to new ideas and experiences. Understand ambiguous situations and solve complex problems. Make sound and timely decisions under stress. Communicate effectively with all audiences. Demonstrate proficiency in military and physical skills required to succeed in combat. Demonstrate mental and physical toughness with the strength of spirit to win. And the last 2, demonstrate respect for others and work effectively with different cultures and people and live the Army values. Those are the 10 outcomes that we look to with our cadets on graduation. Let me give you an example of how we develop just one of those: the capacity for broad perspectives and working with other cultures and other people. And we do this in so many ways. Many of the 37 fields of study at the United States Military Academy address international issues, address culture. The 8 languages that we teach at West Point address this. Our staff and faculty in so many, many ways bring in large measure their own experience in dealing with culture to the classroom, to the athletic field each and every day. Staff and faculty in large measure that has on average multiple tours in combat in the past 11 years. They know what it is like to command a joint, an interagency, an intergovernmental, a multinational formation, and they communicate that on a regular basis to cadets across the disciplines of the academic program. We send 132 cadets abroad each year now in semesters to study in other parts of the world, from Beijing to Amman, from Santiago to Zaragoza, to learn to listen to other voices and other perspectives, to prepare them for the international responsibilities that they have as junior officers. Short duration cultural immersion, 3 to 5 weeks in a summer period. The presence of 8 foreign liaison officers at the United States Military Academy, and the presence over 4 years of 56 cadets from 33 different countries today at West Point. That international program is completely nested with theater security cooperation plans and with the national security strategy as directed by the headquarters of the Department of the Army. So for each of these outcomes that we speak about in the West Point Leader Development System, there is a means to accomplish that before our cadets begin their service as officers. The theoretical framework of this system is very simple. It comes from 622. It is the Be, Know, Do framework. Commissioned officers are leaders in the Army who are inspired by a unique professional identity. This identity is not only shaped by what they know and do, competence, but most importantly by a deeply held personal understanding and acceptance of what it means to be character of a commissioned officer. That officership is based on a self-concept that consists of 4 facets: the warrior, the leader of character, the servant of the nation, and always member of the profession. Army officers must adapt all those facets in order to construct a professional identity that is sufficiently robust to meet the demands of this century. Now, character development begins at cadet basic training, as I mentioned, and it proceeds throughout all 4 years of a cadet's time at the United States Military Academy. The traits of the Army profession fall naturally into our 3 domains: the academic, the military, and the athletic. In our military program, we have a rigorous and relevant reflection of the Army's current operational needs. The academic program reinforces the traits of the profession by its focus on critical thinking and creative problem solving. And the athletic program, self-evident with its focus on teamwork, on discipline, and its focus on esprit de corps. Each of these domains is underwritten by the Cadet Code of Honor, the honor system, and by our values in the Army. As the Chief said, it's about trust between leader and led. It's about trust, in this case, between cadets that begins on the very, very first day, and it's developed and sustained over a lifetime of service as a career officer. These 3 domains often merge into one example. Let me give you a sense of that. In the spring of every year, we pick the worst possible weather day in the month of April, and we take our cadets out to Camp Buckner to do what is known as the Sandhurst International Competition, which is a tough, rigorous 2 days of military stakes in which we run through obstacle courses. We do land navigation, rifle marksmanship with 55 teams from around the world, 8 international teams. The very first obstacle in the past couple of years had been an A-frame, a very simple plywood A-frame. The requirement for this 25 feet by 15 feet high A-frame was simply for a 9-man squad to move sandbags from one side to another. Seems pretty straightforward, except for one thing. Only the squad leader was allowed to see the task. Everyone else was blindfolded. I can remember standing there and watching the first 7 teams go through this event, and I saw 7 different permutations. And that's about critical thinking skills and problem-solving strategies that transcend all 3 domains: the physical domain, the academic domain, and certainly the military domain in terms of tactics and techniques. And that's what we must have for these leaders of character in this complex 21st century. Now, formal instruction in professional ethics is taught in all 4 years through our professional military ethic program. It's complemented by a capstone course, which is a graduation requirement for all seniors at the United States Military Academy, MX 400, a program overseen by General Retired Fred Franks and the Simon Center for the Professional Military Ethic. It's an interdisciplinary curriculum which addresses an Army in transition, officership and action through mission command, the military profession, the company grade officer, and the field grade officer. That course includes standard classroom instruction, case studies, and interaction and presence throughout the term from serving field commanders, from the platoon level all the way up to corps command. It always speaks to the values and the ethics of our United States Army. We talked about case studies of the platoon leader in the Kunar province who deals with ethical dilemmas and resolves them by adherence to Army standards, but it also speaks to the lieutenant at Fort Hood who is the supply officer and who has responsibility for property accountability in his or her unit. It talks fundamentally about doing the right thing in accordance with Army values. So from military training to academic instruction to the physical program at the United States Military Academy, and through constant review and focus on the ethical codes of the United States Army, we are preparing our cadets for the tough and the serious and the immediate responsibilities they will have as officers leading soldiers in our United States Army. The Army profession is their guide, and the West Point Leader Development System is our fundamental approach to integrating that at the United States Military Academy. Thank you.
Mr. Snyder.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thanks to AUSA for allowing us to have this discussion today, because this is an essential topic for us to define who we are as an Army. Civilians have always been and will always be part of the Army. It may surprise those of you who have not been civilians to know that we take an oath that's very similar to the oath that I took when I became a second lieutenant. So there's already that beginning of a sense of duty, a sense of obligation to nation when you become an Army civilian. Today, 60% of the generating force, the United States Army, is made up of civilians. So it seems to me that it's vital that our Army civilians be incorporated into the Army profession. Now, I think the key word for looking at how Army civilians become part of the Army profession is commitment. Commitment of the Army civilians to the Army, to the profession, and a commitment of the Army to our Army civilians. Now, let me talk first about the commitment of our Army civilians to the profession. The first commitment is a commitment to excellence. Army civilians perform jobs that are vital to the success of the Army. And the work that they do has to be first rate. It has to be the best that it can be. So whether you're a rocket scientist at Huntsville or a mechanic in Anniston, the work that you do must be excellent. And the commitment of an Army civilian to the profession has to be, no matter what your job is, whether it's figuring out how missiles work or performing maintenance on a tracked vehicle at Anniston, that work is important to the Army and it must be first rate. So that's the first commitment. The second commitment tags along to that, and that is the commitment to the soldier. Every Army civilian must think about the fact that what he or she does has an effect on soldiers' lives, on their ability to do their jobs. And again, if you've ever talked to a mechanic in any of our depots, in any of our arsenals, they will speak with pride about the fact that they know that someday a soldier's going to drive that vehicle or fire that weapon or wear that protective vest. And they take a very personal ownership and pride in the fact that a soldier someday will touch something that they've touched. And I think that's important because, as the chief said, it is about trust. Our soldiers need to trust our Army civilians. Trust that the job they do is the best they can do. So that's the second commitment, the commitment to the soldier. The third commitment an Army civilian makes to the profession is a commitment to the institution. You know, I was talking to my boss, the Honorable Tom Lamont, who's the Assistant Secretary for MNRA, about being here today, and he said, make sure you tell them that in his 3 years in his position, that he has worked for 3 chiefs of staff, 2 vice chiefs of staff, he's worked with 5 G1s or acting G1s, and 3, soon to be 4, G3s. So even though he's only been in the job for 3 years, he already sees himself as part of the continuity of the institution of the Army. And I think you'll find that when you talk to Army civilians, that's one of the things that we're most proud of, is the fact that we are there to help maintain the Army over time, to make sure that the Army continues as commanders change out, as command teams change out. There's still that bedrock of the Army civilians who are there to help guide the new team as they come in. So I think that's important to understand about the role of Army civilians and Army civilians' commitment to the Army. And I think the commitment of the Army to Army civilians is one of training, education, and experience. We have to invest in the training and the education and the experience of our Army civilians if we want them to be part of the profession. Now, the Army civilian workforce transformation is already a start on that. Every Army civilian now belongs to a career program. And in that career program, they will see a path of training and education and experience that will allow them to progress within their career program. We've never done that before. When I came in as a civilian, only 40% of Army civilians belong to a career program. Now 100% do. And we're investing money and people into developing those career programs to make sure, again, that civilians can have that excellence, that they can have that commitment to excellence, commitment to soldiers, and commitment to the institution. We're working with the Army G3 and with TRADOC to make sure that we have the ability to educate and train our Army civilians and to give them the experience they need to do well as members of a profession. So I would say, again, in summary, it's about commitment of Army civilians to the profession, commitment of the profession and the Army to our civilians. And the commitment the civilians have to make is to excellence in the work they do, commitment to the soldier, and commitment to the institution. And it's all about training, education, and experience. Dave, thanks.
Thanks. General McMaster.
I just want to thank everyone for the opportunity to be on this panel. You know, we have a tremendous opportunity at the Maneuver Center of Excellence to contribute to the strengthening of the Army profession, our Army's profession. There's been some great work done. I see Jeff in the back from CAPE. And then I think we can obviously rest our profession on a very strong doctrinal foundation with the great work that's been done at CAC. So what I'd like to do is focus really on one aspect of our profession, and that's the aspect of expert knowledge. The military profession, our Army profession, requires expert knowledge really for 2 main reasons. One is to fight and employ military capabilities in support of policy, and second, often later in careers, is to provide the best military advice to national security policymakers and decision makers. And all of us have a role in that, even from the very beginning of a leader's career. We first, though, have to focus on what we call the fundamentals, right? The ability to fight and win as teams. And in the Maneuver Center, at the Maneuver Center, we focus on that fight at the tactical level. And those competencies involve the ability to plan and prepare operations, and then to communicate clearly to your soldiers, to your team, how that team is going to fight to execute that mission. That involves a second key competency, which is to visualize the conduct of operations over time and space and in complex environments as these forces interact with the enemy, but also a broad range of other factors that are often destabilizing to the mission. The third thing to begin with that is to be able to begin that level of understanding is to understand those complex environments to begin with, the political, cultural, tribal, ethnic, sectarian dynamics that generate a lot of these micro conflicts among which we've been operating and trying to forge sustainable political outcomes. And the fourth is to obviously make decisions in combat. We need our leaders to be able to make timely decisions in combat, which involves the need to think ahead of where they are as a way of anticipating problems, as a way to make sure that their organizations are prepared for any eventuality and can make contact under their own terms or respond very quickly to tactical surprises. Oftentimes that involves a sixth competency, which is to apply all arms into the fight. And what's really powerful about Fort Benning at this juncture in our history, and because of what others have done, well advanced of Command Sergeant Major Carabello and I, to have infantry and armor there together, working together in a sustained way in collaboration with the other centers of excellence on how we bring our armies and joint capabilities to bear against problems is really powerful. Our leaders then also in contact have to be able to coordinate with adjacent units as they're bringing those assets to bear, and they have to think and act consistent with the philosophy of mission command. Really, the one excuse for failure we shouldn't accept from any of our leaders is that they're waiting for orders. So the ability to understand the commander's intent and to take initiative within that intent. And then our leaders have to be able to fight and report simultaneously, and then they have to preserve their combat capability and the moral character of their teams in environments of persistent danger and in the face of combat trauma. So as we prepare our leaders for these fundamentals, we also, though, have to prepare our leaders to begin to think broadly about war and warfare, to be able to place their experiences in context of a fundamental understanding of the enduring continuities in war, as well as changes in the evolving, character of warfare. And so what we're endeavoring to do broadly is consolidate lessons of the last 11 years of combat, but make a grounded projection into the future and to make sure our leaders and our maneuver force are prepared for those challenges. And I'd just like to throw out for discussion what I believe are the four enduring continuities in the nature of war, because all of these have implications for leader development and the development of expert knowledge as part of our profession. First, war is an extension of politics. This means we will, as we have always had in our past, complex missions in complex environments. That means we're going to have to be able to defeat enemy organizations, but also have to conduct operations in a way that get to sustainable political outcomes consistent with our vital interests and worthy of the sacrifices that our soldiers are making. It means we have to operate on physical battlegrounds, but also on other battlegrounds. The second, the psychological, moral, and cultural, the human dimension of conflict. And what that means is we have to understand the drivers of conflict at the local level, how our actions interact with those factors so we can accomplish our missions. The third enduring element of the nature of war is that war is a contest of wills. And this is where we have to really focus on preparing our soldiers, steeling our soldiers and our units against the disintegrative or debilitating effects of fear and combat trauma. And there are a number of things that our Army has done and is doing and will do in the future to do that, to build confidence, to build the trust that General Odierno talked about as bulwarks against fear and its debilitating effects. And the fourth is that war is nonlinear because of the continuous interaction with the enemy and other destabilizing factors, which means that we have to continually strive to seize and retain the initiative over the enemy, and there are implications, obviously, for leader development there. To be able to understand this, we are endeavoring to introduce early and to carry on from West Point and other pre-commissioning activities, really the ability to study war in width, depth, and context, and war and warfare. And so there's a self-study initiative underway and so forth, but it's really looking across our curriculum to see how we can focus on the fundamentals, but also help our leaders understand the continuities in war and its implications for the expert knowledge they have to develop across a career. Thank you.
Thanks. Sub-Major.
Thanks, sir. We're going to kick off standards and discipline in the beginning of January as part of the profession. I'm excited about it. But I ask each of you here, in your own mind, if I say the word discipline, does something positive or negative come to your mind? positive. Unfortunately, we focus on being disciplined too often in our Army. And if you think about discipline, the root of discipline is disciple, a follower. Someone who believes and is committed to something bigger than themselves. And if you think about it in those terms, commitment is part of our profession, just like character. You spend a lot of time on competence, what you do and what your job is and how many badges you've earned and what you've done. But character and commitment are just as important. And being a disciplined soldier means you're committed, you are a follower of the Army profession. Our men and women do amazing things each and every day. The chief beat me to Afghanistan this fall. I don't know how he did it, but he did. And he got to meet the same guy that I did, a staff sergeant in the 1st Battalion, 23rd Infantry, who had a nickname called Whisper. And Whisper, in one 7-hour period, had found 23 IEDs himself. That's amazing. He's a competent person. But his commitment to the Army meant that he was going to continue to train and develop the other wolfhound operators to find those devices. He had the character to continue to go out and demonstrate his leadership, the values that our Army holds. He's an amazing young man. He's disciplined. Met this sergeant first class as part of the Best Warrior competition. She is a drill sergeant in the United States Army. Sole parent, 3 children. Gets up every morning and trains 40 soldiers to be persons of character, commitment, and competence. And we have an amazing Army. That takes discipline. She understands what the standard is, and she goes about our business, the business of being a professional Army soldier. So I'd ask that as we move forward and we look at what it is that we expect our soldiers to do, are we inculcating that idea that discipline earns trust, which is the bedrock of our profession? It does. If I'm where I'm supposed to be in the uniform that I'm supposed to be in, and I'm doing what it is that I've been told to do, I'm a disciplined soldier, and I'm going to earn your trust. You know, we were in, as a matter of fact, there's a former platoon sergeant of mine here in this room right now, and he was Apache Red 1. And yeah, he was a disciplined platoon sergeant. Why is that? He did what it is that the nation needed him to do every single day on Route Irish in 2004 and 2005 in Baghdad, Iraq, with his platoon each and every day. He didn't have to go on that patrol every day because he had sections that could do it, but he had the discipline to ensure that he was out there leading his soldiers. We have a great Army doing amazing things, and they are disciplined. They do know what the standard is. They have discipline. And we have the tools available for those that are not disciplined to take care of them. It's either motivation or a training problem. We have a way to solve either one of those. So I'm excited about relooking, refocusing our energy on standards and discipline in our Army. I think our soldiers will surprise us, and that they probably know more than we think right now about what it means to be standard, have a standard, and be disciplined. So I'm excited. Who? Appreciate it, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Sergeant Major. What we'd like to do now is open up to a general Q&A session. We have mics here in the center, and then we have others that will pass around. Now, in the effort to be good stewards of taxpayers' money, we want to make sure that we get our most money out of the chief and sergeant major's salary. So I think we've booked them from event to event to event to event. And they may have to be the first ones that leave here today. And so if you have specific questions for the chief and the sergeant major. You might want to address those first, and then we'll just open up to the rest of the panel. So, first questions.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Major Pickner. Sir, my question has to do with the apolitical nature of our profession. Obviously, a bedrock of the trust between the United States people and the United States Army has to do with the fact that we stay out of domestic politics. How do we inculcate that in both our officers and our retired officers when we hang up the uniform? Thank you.
I think it becomes a more difficult issue when you talk about retired officers. But let me talk about why we're in uniform. A couple things. First, everyone should be. I don't want to confuse being apolitical with not being interested in politics and what's going on. In fact, it's important that our young leaders are interested in what's going on in our country and understanding what's going on politically. It's important to understand that. And it's one of the key things I think we have to continue to develop, to have those understandings. It's one thing to understand it. It's one thing to have a view. It's one thing to express that view or to continue to do your job no matter what. There's one clear thing that we have to always follow, is that we are asked to perform and conduct our missions to the best of our ability without judgment of political ideas behind the decision, unless we believe it's amoral or unethical. And then it's time to make a decision on whether you want to make a statement or stand or not. And that's one thing you always have to judge. And, you know, people ask me the question all the time, what would it take you to stand up and resign or not do what they ask you to do? And I said, I'm not quite sure, but it'd have to be something that I believe is something that is against what I believe is in the best interest of this country, the best interest of our Army, or something that I think is morally, ethically not right. And so you all have to make that decision wherever you are. But the thing we have to be careful of is that, especially as you become more senior in the military, is that people do want to listen to what you say, and they look at it very carefully. And you have to understand that I don't need to voice my opinion in public. I have the opportunity to do that in private. And that's where it belongs. Well, I can give an honest, forthright military opinion, military advice in private to whoever it might be. For those who believe that they have to say it publicly, in my mind, are bounding on unprofessional. Because to do that is, in my mind, not right. And here's, let me take a little deeper. And a lot of people are going to disagree with what I'm going to say now, but I'm going to say it because I feel fairly strong about it. I've always felt very strongly about those who say the unnamed military source or the senior military official. To me, if you're not willing to give your name, it's cowardly. You know, if you're going to make a statement, make it. Stand behind it. But we have too much of that, where it's easy to say things when you're not going to be accountable. See, this is about accountability. You have to be accountable for your actions. You have to be accountable for your words. And you have to be willing to take what goes along with that when you speak and say something. So I think that's important. As you become more senior, it's very interesting. I have found myself, as I've become in more senior positions, to understand the political nuances of what's going on around you, to ensure that you're still able to give what's the best military advice being asked, and something that's not condoned as politically correct. I also get frustrated with when people say, well, you're just saying that because, you know, you're going along with what the president's saying or with what the secretary's saying or whatever. Again, I will tell you is, when I have disagreements, I voice them in private. And I believe I have the forms that allow me to do that. And until I believe something is morally, ethically wrong or something that is so detrimental to our Army, I will continue to do that in private. And I think that's what everybody should do. You have a chain of command, by the way. And that's part of this trust thing, is trusting your chain of command to bring up issues through your chain of command, where you don't have to go around the chain of command and say things as a secret source and other things. And we have other ways in the military, if you know, whistleblowers and other things that we have ways to work around this. But, you know, to me, that's fundamental to who we are. And when we lose that, we lose, in my mind, our honest vote if we start to become political. And if we start to make decisions based on what we think is the politically right answer to give. And that's when we sacrifice our profession.
Right here, sir.
Gentlemen, excuse me, Major Chris Williams. My question has to do with the Army profession. And I served both in Iraq and Afghanistan in a leadership position. But the hardest job that I had was in Denver, Colorado, as a recruiting company commander. Now, I'm not completely comfortable with the Army profession as we're billing it. How do you feel? Are you completely comfortable with the Army profession not making us exclusive among a society that we serve? I know currently 3 out of 10 Americans age 18 to 24 are qualified, so that takes out 7. And as we move forward, I understand that number's going to get lower. So with the Army profession not billing ourselves as a service necessarily, but more as a profession, do you think that makes us more exclusive and ultimately, and maybe from a civilian perspective, Mr. Snyder, you could weigh in on this, does it allow policymakers to use us, as General McMaster said, as war is an extension of policy, does it allow policymakers to use us more liberally? And so, I guess going back to my question, does the Army as a profession make us more exclusive?
Well, let me take a shot at this first. I don't think so. I think the point I try to make is that we bring people in from many different walks of life, and then we provide them and inculcate them with what we think the Army values are. So it's not exclusive. In fact, in my mind, it's very inclusive. And what you're trying to do is you bring them in, and then we try to align them with what we believe the moral, ethical values, the discipline, the standards that are necessary for us to be successful in our profession. And as I tried to point out, our profession is very different than any other profession because of the responsibilities that we're given. So we're not saying you don't meet our professional standards, so we're not going to take you. What we're saying, we're going to bring you in, and we're going to help you to meet our professional standard. We're going to help you and inculcate in you that we have different values. We have different measurements for what we consider to be acceptable and unacceptable behavior. You know, I would argue that a lot of people come in the Army specifically for that reason, because, you know, my experience tells me there's a lot of young men and women who have no structure in their lives at all. They have no parents, or they have one parent, or they come from a place where education wasn't valued, or they didn't have a chance to get an education, or they see this as an opportunity. And that's what our profession is about, is giving opportunities to young men and women. And I can give you thousands of examples of that I've experienced over my 36 years of service. So I see it much differently than that. I don't see it as exclusive. I see it as something that anybody can come in from any background and be successful. Anybody. It doesn't matter what religion you are, what color you are. It doesn't matter where you come from. If you want to, you can come in this organization, but we're not be successful. Now, we're not perfect. We have our issues. But I think more than any other place, we include everybody. So that's my thoughts on it.
I think we were very careful in designing the concept of the Army profession. We started off, and believe me, very quickly, a lot of folks pointed out to us the danger of building walls around ourselves in the nature of civil-military relations. And so the notion of an aspiring professional, the notion of inclusion of retirees, within the Army profession, not practicing members of the Army profession, but former members of the Army profession, and then the inclusion of our civilians as members of the Army profession as well. We attempted to address those issues, and I think the other point that the Chief makes is in terms of the inclusiveness of it in the notion of the aspiring professional in terms of who can come into the military. Although I take your point, as the population pool shrinks that we're recruiting from, I can see where you could take that point. That is our counter to it, though.
I've thought about the idea of profession. Professions in general, of course, law, medicine, the military are defined by some unique qualities. They all speak to a specialized field of knowledge. Certainly the United States military as a profession has that element. They speak to a sense of corporate identity, a sense of strong affiliation, and they always in our profession speak to a sense of a unique code of ethics, and certainly the United States Army fits very well into that category. So the question, which I think is more about the business of not being separate from the society that we serve, is a very, very good question. But I think the idea of profession actually works in our favor. It's what General Cohn spoke to when he talked about inclusiveness. We serve a unique and important role for the society that we serve as a military profession. So I think that actually works in our favor based on the definition of profession.
And I would just add, from a civilian point of view, I mean, I'm a career civilian, but I've worked pretty much for the last 12 years for political appointees. And to follow up on the Chief's point, and I think General Cohn's point, is there is, when senior military leaders speak in private to the political leaders listen. They respect the professionalism, they respect the advice, and I think we've been fortunate in this country that political leaders from both parties listen, and vice versa. I know when my boss talks about issues with senior military leaders, they listen to his judgment and his advice as he sees it as a civilian coming from the Midwest and sort of bringing what he's seen. So I think it's important as we look at the profession to have that ability both to speak, as the Chief said, and also to listen, as I know the Chief and other senior leaders do when the political leaders talk. And it's finding that balance that I think is key to success as a profession.
The gentleman in the blue shirt there.
Thank you. My name is Carl Osgood. I write for Executive Intelligence Review. I'd like to get back to what General Odierno, what you were saying in response to the first question, because 2 years ago I was at this same panel. General Caslin talked about how every officer is sworn to uphold and defend the Constitution, which seems to me is a fairly solid standard, of both a constitutional standard and a legal standard. But what drove that discussion to a great deal was the scandal, the Abu Ghraib scandal in Iraq, which was in fact could be traced back to directives that were issued by the civilian leadership long before we invaded Iraq. So what I'd like to ask you and anybody else on the panel who'd like to respond is the officer's responsibility under the Constitution if the civilian leadership issues orders that are constitutionally or legally questionable.
Well, the key, what makes it difficult is if the word questionable. When they're questionable and they're up for debate, I think it makes it more difficult. And I think it really depends on your view on how it pertains to our ethics values and our profession, whether you think it's right or wrong. I mean, and that's an individual decision. I would just say I want to go back just for a minute. I don't want to dig up old ground, but you did mention Abu Ghraib in this, and I think it's. But I would argue that was much more than just the types of interrogation that we use. That was one issue. But there was another issue involved, which in my mind was a total lack of Army professionalism that occurred in Abu Ghraib. Standards, discipline, lack of oversight, lack of leadership, lack of So there was a lot of other things that I think absolutely directly relate to the fact of how important our Army profession is if you take away the discussion about how we interrogate. So I think in my mind, it's when you have a question that is potentially constitutionally questionable, you do it. Now, I'm not sure at the time we thought it was constitutionally questionable. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. You'd have to ask those who are directly involved in interrogation techniques if they thought it was or not. So that's why that becomes such a very difficult question, whether it was or not. But it's a good question. Your question is a good one, because those are the dilemmas that we have. And in some cases, as an officer or as a non-commissioned officer, you have to decide where you draw the line. And you have to decide where you decide it doesn't meet your moral, ethical values. And sometimes you have to be ahead of the institution on this. And that's a tough call. But it's happened before in our history, and it'll happen again.
Sir, I think you and the Sergeant Major have to be moving out, so any wrap-up comments either from yourself,
No, I mean,
Sergeant
I would
Major?
just say, I don't think we should end. I think there's great panel members here. I would suggest you continue the conversation. It's very important. I have to head over to the family forum here. But this, in my mind, I could spend all day, I would love to spend all day having this conversation with our young officers, with our non-commissioned officers, and with our soldiers, because it's fundamentally so important to who we are. And so I'm really pleased with this forum that we have. And we skirted the issue of civilian oversight in the military, but that is our Constitution. And that's what strengthens us, is the civilian oversight of our military. There's a very good reason why that is in our Constitution. It's our responsibility to understand that. It's our responsibility to follow our civilian leadership unless to a time we think it's morally and ethically a problem. And that's our job. So it's important that we give our opinions, we give them in private, but it's also important to understand that they are elected officials, and our Constitution says the President is the Commander-in-Chief. And that's what our Constitution says. And we do swear an oath to that Constitution. And it's important for all of us to understand that as we go forward. Sergeant Major, you have anything you want to end up with, please?
Sir, I'm just excited about the future. We got a great Army, and it's going to get better, and I think this panel is going to help us, so I'm excited about the outcome. Cool.
All right, and we'll continue on.
Thank you.
Do you have a question? Sergeant Major, can we have the microphone down here? Question.
My name's Griffith, and I'm probably one of the oldest soldiers in this room today. But and because of that, I'd make a comment going back to this exclusivity point that was brought up. By the way, after Vietnam, and General Croson was one of our great leaders in that period after Vietnam, where we really took a very tough look at ourselves, did some really critical examination of what had happened to us as we came out of, or during Vietnam, and as we came out, what we had to do to get the Army back on the course that ultimately took us to Desert Storm, for example. So there were a lot of great things that took place. One of the things, and this may sound like a simple thing, but one of the things that occurred, we had recruiting slogans. And, we knew we were separate from the civilian society because the civilian society didn't like us very much during the Vietnam period. A lot of ugly things said to us during that period and after that period. And so we came out, and one of the early points was, in our recruiting, was, the Army wants to join you. And we thought about that, and we said, wait a minute. Do we really want to be like our society of 1969, 1970? And we said, no, we don't. We don't want to be like that society. We got to be better than the society from which we come. And so from that, we dropped the Army wants to join you, and some of you may remember Be All You Can Be, which became probably one of the most favorite recruiting slogans we ever had. But the point is that I think that when you look at the American society today, There's a lot of things going on out there, lack of civility being one of them, that we do not want to emulate. I don't think the Army leadership wants us to emulate as we go forward. So I think it's how you use the term exclusive. I think if you use it to say we're different and we must live by higher values, by higher standards than the general American population, and by the way, many of the leaders of the America, then we probably should be thinking about we need to be exclusive in a lot of ways. So forgive that sermon, but I think it's an issue you really need to grapple with, and it's clear to me that the chief has already believes very strongly in those ideas. Thank you.
Sir, I would just, I think you're spot on. We have a profound impact on the people who serve in the United States Army in terms of shaping them and developing them, and we have choices that we have to make in that regard. Society holds us accountable, by the way. This is why the suicide problem is so focused. The inference is they were in the military, they're under your control, you have responsibility. When we have a mass shooting, the first question I always think of, was this a soldier? Because that's the first thing they'll say in the media. So to shrink away from our responsibility for an active decision in how we shape individuals in the United States Army, we have to take it in a direction. And I think the direction we've chosen here is wholly appropriate.
Right here.
Hi, my name is Christy Kaufman. I'm the Executive Director of the Code of Support Foundation. I'm also an 11-year Army wife. We talked a lot today about trust, and I'm trying to figure out how families fit into the profession of arms. It's a very odd situation to be in where we are, by the nature of my husband's battalion command, I had a position of authority just based on who I was married to. So it's unusual for that to be the case. So, we try to mentor the younger spouses coming in, but I have to be honest, we're pretty tired. And so what do we expect of our family members, both as family members and then as these family readiness group, quote-unquote, professionals? And how has that affected the trust between the Army and the families? I think going forward, we have a lot of damage in the pipeline, not just with the soldiers and the families. So, how do we kind of inculcate, as we talked about today, the families as well after 10 years of a pretty ridiculous operational tempo?
Okay, I guess since I'm sitting on the far left, thanks.
I would just tell you, look at HR's picture over there. I think they have glamour shots now at Fort Benning, and I think he had a boa on originally, and they removed it. So.
And my wife said you better smile because you look too mean if you're not smiling. So, well, I think that's a great question, really. How do families fit into the profession, and really what we need the profession to do for us, right? I think the profession is important because we're talking a lot about how we define ourselves and what society's expectations are of us. In large measure, institutions like us, we define ourselves based on others' expectations of us. So what are our expectations of each other in a unit? What are our expectations as we look more broadly across to families as well? And of course, what we want to have is expectations that we're going to be there for each other, that we can trust each other. And there's a practical reason for that, right? Because really war and warfare is aimed, and this is from the book The Face of Battle, that looked at war from the 16th century to the 20th century. War is aimed at the disintegration of human groups, right? How do we prevent that kind of disintegration? How do we prevent the kind of breakdown in moral character and the breakdown in trust? And so, just thinking about this over the last several years, I think if you look at certain cases where there has been a breakdown, there are four main causes, I think. The first is ignorance. Ignorance about really our values and what we expect of each other, but maybe also ignorance about the situation you're about to go into. What is it like as a family member to have a unit deployed and to have some of the worst things happen that could happen, right? The worst thing, which is the loss of one of those soldiers who's part of a family and part of that extended Army family. So ignorance is the first thing we have to combat. The second is uncertainty. Not to get overly philosophical, right, but Aristotle said the source of all fear is uncertainty. So how do you reduce that uncertainty? The third is fear itself. Fear is debilitating. You've seen this, I'm sure, in your family readiness groups, right? There are some people who don't handle that fear and that anxiety well, and that they become disruptive, to that group. The same thing happens in units, right? Fear is the worst thing that can happen in a lot of ways. And the fourth is combat trauma itself, a traumatic experience. These four things can lead to a breakdown in moral character of units, discipline, trust, and so forth. So what are the things we can do? We can educate, right? We can educate ourselves about what our expectations are about each other. That's warrior ethos. That is our Army values. It is what CAPE has done and Jeff Peterson have done with really the training support packages that are integrated. But expand those to families. Keep the families educated about our profession and thank them. Thank them for the sacrifices they're making so that their soldiers can serve. The other is to explain to them really what impact their soldiers are having, right? To show them that what we're achieving is worth the risks and the sacrifices that they're making. So go after the ignorance. The uncertainty, a lot of that's communication, right? Trying to communicate to spouses, family members, where there's, what their soldiers are encountering, what they're doing. Commanders, command sergeants, major coming back, giving talks about that is important. And then it's really the training, the training that we undergo, to build, to really be able to deal with environments of uncertainty, to place us in complex environments. Family readiness group training, important, I think, in that connection. And essentially, you're building confidence and trust the whole time. And then ultimately, as all of us know, leadership is the most important dynamic. It's what General Odierno said in response to the Abu Ghraib question, right? A soldier will follow a good leader anywhere and under any conditions of battle, right? How do we extend that leadership to families, provide as much support through our rear detachments, and through our volunteer spouses who are involved in really what is a super difficult job in the circumstances we've been in. But it's a great question. Thank you.
I think that the key point is that the first order effect on the Army profession is probably not directed directly at family members, but the second and third order implications in terms of personal conduct, in terms of leadership. You think about things like spousal abuse, or you think about things like sexual harassment. When you identify and clearly define the characteristics of a profession and recognize that these behaviors have no place in regard to someone who is in the military, I think it creates an environment, much as HR enumerated, that will improve with an explicit consideration of the role of the soldier in the family and help to improve those kinds of issues. And again, that is how it was conceptualized, as I recall, when we went through it. It is a second and third order effect that will have the greatest benefit to the family.
Well, I mean, that's the key thing, right? Is in terms of family involvement and the Army's done quite a bit of this. We've got the FRG advisors now who are on the payroll. You leave a strong rear detachment back. You make sure you have chaplain coverage. and you try to unburden the families as much as possible. Some of it's natural, but the key thing, I think, is educating the FRGs about their roles, because a lot of times, a lot of the problems come out when they don't understand their roles. But it's obviously, I just have tremendous respect for anybody who volunteers under these conditions in particular. And I think the training part of it that I mentioned is important, especially in the area of grief work, right? In times of war is extremely important. And it's oftentimes, you don't realize how much stress, combat stress by one removed, is placed on spouses, when as a unit is deployed in combat.
But I would also argue the notion that automatically accrued to you because of who your spouse is incorrect. And I would just tell you, having commanded a corps and having commanding FRGs right now, I can tell you that is not the way it is supposed to work. The commander always has responsibility for what happens in his organization. He executes it through a rear detachment commander in terms of authorities and responsibilities. I understand functionally, though, it still continues to happen, and it is troubling.
Over here, sir. Go ahead. Right here, sir.
That's an absolute essential point. I think we get at it to some extent through the Army profession. I think physics and math is probably going to be the way we get at it. As this train, in fact, slows down, our leadership, our emphasis on the role of leaders to followers, our programs can catch up. And frankly, we, to a certain extent, been driving faster than our headlights. And as a result of that, we've had a number of these problems. So I think time is on our side, at least as I look at patch charts and things ahead. I do think, again, the second and third order consequences of emphasizing leader responsibilities, emphasizing soldier responsibilities and accountability, I think they will create an overall environment where we will, in fact, do better.
I think, as HR said, it is in large measure about the primacy of leadership in our profession, the responsibility that all of us learned as junior officers or junior non-commissioned officers to know your unit, to listen as much as you direct, so that you have an apprehension of all those things that are taking place in the human dimension, which is what you're talking about. The work of reserve ambassadors, civilian aides to the Secretary of the Army, all these collective elements of leadership can make a difference. I think the Army is also committed in a very tangible way over the past several years to the science which is represented in our comprehensive soldier and family fitness program now, that I think is really becoming much more positive as we have sent lots of youngsters off to the Master Resilience Trainer program. I think over time that's going to make a big difference in identifying, before we enter into a trauma, whether it's in deployment or in the continental United States, how to deal with that in the positive way, how to adapt, how to create the agility that units must have, that individuals must have to deal with these stresses that we see. We don't know yet what other hidden crises lie ahead. We have a terrible track record in divining the future, but if we work on things like comprehensive soldier and family fitness, I think we can best prepare our youngsters for what lies ahead. Thanks for what you do.
I think we had a question right here. Oh.
Gentlemen of the panel, Captain Eric Hanft, thank you for speaking to us today. General Odierno spoke about our recruits are coming in from all walks of life with various backgrounds, and it's our responsibility to bring them into our organization and to lift them up and to mentor them from the immediate supervisor on upward. Unfortunately, my experience has been that there's a small minority of those that simply do not assimilate to our profession, and their immediate supervisor has a responsibility to continue to attempt to train them and make them better. But my question is there a point, especially as we're talking about reducing our force and really focusing on the Army as a profession, where the cost-benefit analysis, so to speak, of that leader expending resources in terms of time and energy into a single person who's simply not rising to the occasion at the expense of the rest of the members of that team. Do we just continue to throw energy at an individual like that, or is there a time where we say you simply are not fit to serve in this job? And then how do we go about dealing with someone like that, barring the typical chapter reasons like DUI and drugs, etc.? Thank you.
Well, very clearly in my mind, there is a time that you say enough. Ultimately, we are going to put weapons in these people's hands, and their judgment as a representative of the United States of America in life or death decisions. And so I think, in my mind, the profession of arms more clearly delineates standards of conduct and behavior. It talks about leader responsibilities in assisting subordinates to reach those ends. But the fact of the matter is that overall, it is about the organization's performance, and it is about the individual's role in that. And so therefore, I think it makes it clearer. I would also point out that in some ways, as we look at what our current recruiting, we just briefed the Secretary on this last year of recruiting, the lowest number of waivers. At one point we had some 29,000 convicted felons in the United States Army. That number is now down to about 6,000. And again, that by attrition, based in terms of what they accomplished while they were in the Army. I think our number of waivers, I think our number of high school graduates, it is a very good cross-cut of quality across the United States that is coming into our Army today. And therefore, my expectations are such that they probably are much more moldable and shapeable to achieve those outcomes. Anybody else?
So I would just say that it's really, nobody should be charged with keeping someone in our Army who's not fit for service. All leaders do their best to develop soldiers and leaders, but it's our responsibility to, I think, weed them out, if they're not capable. I think everybody knows that. And if somebody doesn't support you on that, you just gotta, you're in the wrong chain of command or something, man. So, but I think that one of the things we're looking at Fort Benning in particular is increasing the rigor in all of our courses, but it's purposeful rigor tied to standards, demonstrated performance in training and education that's directly connected to the learning outcomes. And those learning outcomes are connected to the knowledge, skills, abilities, attributes we need in that soldier or that leader in that particular grade. So I don't feel any pressure from General Cohen or anybody to keep anybody in who can't meet those standards. But what it is our duty to do is to set those standards high, but then for our cadre and everybody to help those soldiers and leaders meet those standards. When they can't, they can't. But we want to see everybody succeed and do our best, as you mentioned, in development of counseling and working with individual soldiers and leaders. But if they can't make it, that's not what our Army's for, is to keep people around who can't meet that standard. And ultimately, it's a disservice to any team that they would join later.
And I think that the important point is not everybody's cut out to be a soldier. And I think that's something that we probably all agree on. And every profession has a way of deciding who's capable of being part of the profession. I'm an attorney, for example, so if you don't pass the bar exam, you don't get to be an attorney. There is a level that people get winnowed out. And it's not to say you're a bad person, it just says you can't practice law. Not everybody's cut out to be a soldier. There might be a good person in other things, but not cut out to be a soldier.
Sir? Okay.
I want to follow up on the stress problem for all the soldiers of the Army. I don't think there's enough realization that that stress problem affected the families just as much as it did the soldiers. Soldiers coming home were introduced to a stressful environment at Fort Bragg or Fort Hood, wherever, because that family's been living waiting for the next casualty report to come in. Family's been living to have to respond to the family who just got the bad news. They live in a tense world, and when a soldier comes home to that, he's not leaving the stressful situation, he's returning to another one. Now, the Army has promised that even at the reduced strength, we're going to be able to guarantee a 24-month rotation policy off into the future. I would like to ask Mr. Snyder if there is any recognition among the civilian hierarchy here that the Army's been too small for the last 20 years, and the cause of this stress and the cause of this multiple rotations at very short intervals is not going to be adjusted by returning to civilian life, in which a soldier is graduating from West Point and he learns over the first 2 or 3 years. I've signed up for a 20-year career where 10 of it is going to be separated from my family. And if I think about a 30-year career, it's even worse, because that's 15 years gone. And I would like to know why the civilian hierarchy of our government doesn't recognize the stress they have put on the Army force and is not going to do anything about it off into the future.
Well, let me first of all say I'm not running for president, so I'm not worried about my answer on that. I mean, I think it has been, I will tell you, my boss understands the stress that the rotations in the past 10 years have put on families. And I think it's really trying to find a balance between how many people we can get in our Army. I mean, when we were recruiting 80,000 people a year, just a few years ago, and General Rochelle, you remember the stress of that time, we were having trouble finding people, and we were throwing tons of money at the recruiting, at bonuses, on enlistment bonuses and re-enlistment bonuses. I'm not sure that the American population, just demographically, can support an Army much bigger than the Army that we've had. And remember, we had about 700,000, 720,000 soldiers on active duty every year for about 5 or 6 years during this time. Even though the end strength of the active Army didn't go up, the difference came from the reserve component. But I'm not sure that we can support an Army much bigger than that demographically. And so I think some of the choices have to be made by people who look at national policy, and not just, my neck of the woods, it's manpower policy, but there is a limit to what the Army can do, because there are a limit to the number of qualified people we can find for the Army, given the population of this country right now. And I think that's the more complex thing that all of us need to be talking about is how big an Army can we support, and therefore how much responsibility can we take on in the world, given the fact that we can probably only acquire an Army of a certain size. I mean, the Brits went through this in the 60s when they went to an all-volunteer force. They decided that they can only afford and can only field a force of a certain size. And they made national security decisions about, coming back from east of Suez, based in part upon what they thought they could support. And it was a very, very well thought out, I think, strategy at the time. The question is the United States sort of facing that point right now, where there's only so much we can do in the world. Now, when a vacuum was created last time, the United States was there to fill it. The question is, if we leave a vacuum, who will fill it? But that, I think, goes beyond the discussion of today, but it's very much, I think, a part of what we need to be looking at as far as the Army and what the Army can do, given the state of the United States population today. So it's a good question. Well, I think that's the discussion that has to be had.
I would also say that we had a 780,000
I just, again, having lived finding 80,000 soldiers just a few years ago was very, very difficult in a volunteer force, even throwing large amounts of money in it. And we were throwing, I don't know, over $1 billion in bonuses to get people to come and to stay. So I know we did it once, but again, the population has changed since then. And I think that's the thing we need to look at and ask. So I don't disagree with you. I just think it's a hard question.
All right, time for one more question out there. In the back, there we go.
General, I'm not going to go into the issues about recruiting or identifying the wrong people at, in a certain amount of time and being able to get them out of the service. But, by the way, my name's Jerry Jackson. But it kind of leads me into the whole issue of the Fort Hood shooting. And we've heard a lot about that the creation of a profession in the Army requires the trust up the chain and down the chain. And if you listen to the news, you talk to soldiers, I can find nary a one who would not agree that it was an act of terrorism, not an act of workplace violence. Yet there seems to be a lack of candor, whether it was because of a political decision to call it something else. But those soldiers and those family members who you hear on the news talking about the impact that declaration of it being workplace violence as opposed to an act of terrorism is having on benefits, just the way they can wake up and look at the fact everybody knows what it was, but there seems to be a lack of candor in the leadership down in calling it what it was. And I'd like to have your opinions on that, please.
Well, I obviously have some opinions on it, but I will tell you, I will refrain from giving my opinion because we're in the middle of a trial. And I don't think it would be particularly useful for me to express my opinion on this particular subject. And I think, at least in my mind, I think that's a valid reason. I think certainly this can always be addressed in the future. But the fact of the matter is, I think addressing this issue publicly at this point is not going to really not going to benefit the situation.
Well, appreciate the great support here for this forum and the give and take, and I'd just like to offer any closing comments to the panel here.
This has been great, and the quality of the questions and the thought behind the questions has really been very useful for me and my team. And I just think the Army profession is the answer. It gives us the left and right range limits to address a number of problems. It resonates with soldiers. They're the ones who brought it to us for action. They have expectations of us as leaders in regard to answering these concerns that they have had. Let's take advantage of this. Let's take advantage of this opportunity that they're capable of giving our Army a clear-eyed assessment on where we stand after 11 years of war, and do the things that we know are right in regard to things like values, leadership, and trust. And I would come down back to the Chief's point about trust being all important. If you can build the trust between leader and follower, between peer and soldier, then you've created the environment you need for all else to prosper. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. General Hunter.
Thanks for letting me be a part of this panel. The timing on this topic, the profession of the military, is quite remarkable. If you think about it, we're at a strategic inflection point right now as we come out of these two campaigns where we have invested so much in the past 11 years and continue to invest. And it's the right moment to stop and remember that the Army is a profession, that it means something, that it's defined by a special body of knowledge, by a sense of corporateness, and always by this fundamental basis of ethics, an ethical code of behavior. That's what leads to trust. It's seeing the right behaviors. That's what makes values into virtues, values that come to life through practical application. When soldiers see that we are not just talking, but that we're walking, that we are actually living our values, then they become the virtues that tell us that the Army is in fact a profession, that it's underwritten by an ethical code, a ASMA, the path ahead that helps lieutenants, sergeants, general officers to make the right decision when no one is looking. And that's the definition of character. So this is the right time to talk about the Army as a profession. Thank you.
Well,
Mr. Snyder.
I would certainly go back to the point about commitment, and I think Sergeant Major of the Army made the point that you know, you talked about discipline and disciple. Well, commitment means to go someplace together or to promise something together, and I think that's the key. Certainly, it is for civilians as part of the profession, but I think for the profession as a whole. And I think the questions that were asked here today, and some very hard ones that there are no easy answers for, is about what it means to be part of a profession. It's dealing with difficult problems that don't have any easy answers and may only have a series of bad answers, and our job is to pick the least bad answer. So I think it's something that's worth talking about. It's worth talking about now, and it's something that helps us figure out who we are as an Army. So thank you.
HR.
Just a comment on one of the earlier points. I think that it is possible for us to maintain and build and strengthen our profession and also remain connected to our society, remain connected to those in whose name we fight. And it's important for us to do that because all of us have seen as we look across popular culture. I think one example is just really how violence is justified in popular culture, in movies, in video games. It's really justified mainly to demonstrate individual prowess. What justifies use of violence in the Army profession? It's our mission. It's fighting for fellow soldiers. That's just one of many examples of how we have to inculcate our soldiers with our ethos, with our values. And we can do that while we preserve that bridge into our society by effective communication. I mean, I'll tell you, there's no better place in the world than Columbus, Georgia, and the Chattahoochee River Valley in terms of the support we have, you know, from our community leaders. We have a constant dialogue, and I think it's important for society to communicate its expectations, our society, of us, and that's why our civilian leadership is so important. And so I don't think that there is a necessary tension. You know, this Samuel Huntingtonian tension between the Army and our profession. And any kind of a disconnect with society. I think we ought to be different. We have to be based on our mission and our role, but we can stay connected. Thank you.
Well, you can just see by the discussions we've had here really how essential and a defining issue the profession is to who we are as soldiers and Army. And for those of you who would like to continue discussion or learn more about it, we'd be more than happy to link up with you down in Hall B, Bravo, at the Army display. We got folks from the Center for Army Profession Ethics, Jeff Peterson, Sergeant Major, the folks that run leader development for the Army, Brigadier General Davis and Tom Guthrie, and then the folks that write the doctrine on leadership and training and all that, Jim Rainey, his folks will all be down there, happy to carry on this conversation. So again, thanks to our panel members and thanks to you all. Have a good day.